Welcome to the McAfee Center Stage webinar series. My name is Austin Ortega and I'll be your facilitator. This webinar is a brief overview covering the common use cases and scenarios regarding this topic. It is not intended to be all-encompassing, as it is not possible to cover all detailed scenarios in an hour. If assistance is needed, please contact McAfee Technical Support. Our presenter today is Tom Constantino. Tom joined Nitro Security 13 years ago as their QA director and has been integral to the SIEM product, shepherding technical product development and enhancements here at McAfee. Ladies and gentlemen, let me hand you over to Tom.
Thanks, Austin. So today we're going to go over monitoring and tuning of the SIEM, just to kind of give you a little bit of the purpose of the session is to kind of handle the operational side of the SIEM, but some of the tuning concepts that will be presented today are also applying to any of users of the SIEM. So as you're creating alarms, reports, and cyber threat feeds. So I intend to go over a monitoring section, which will talk about some of the things that are doing with the runtime of the SIEM, things like health flags, processes, and using the task manager. The second section will go into how to use alarms and common problems that we've seen with alarms. Also talk about some of the creation of things. So, best concepts, best practices to do as you're trying to create things with alarms, reports, and cyber threat feeds. Okay, so let's go ahead and step into the presentation. So monitoring of the SIEM is a really important part of what happens to make sure like any application runs the best it can run. And generally, when you see the application slow down, or the SIEM, the SM slow down, or any of the devices when they're not performing properly, it usually has to do with maybe there's some issue that is preventing it from running at its perfect working state. So I'd like to talk about health flags for just a second here. So flags are what we do to try to monitor what is happening on the system, and exposed to a little kind of waving option here to say, hey, you should go look at this. Happens to be that some of the flags sometimes are ignored. But I really hope to highlight today how it's really important to actually look at the health flags on the system, because what they do is they indicate system issues. They could indicate hardware issues that you're having on your system, communications with devices, things where maybe the data is not shaped correctly and coming in the future or the past, things that have to do with states of inactivity if you're not getting data. So there's many causes or reasons for why a flag might be thrown. So if you look to the screen on the right there, you can see I've listed a few of the flags. I mean, there's probably over 100 different types of messages that could come up, but you can see that these are conditions that are really important on trying to make sure if your system's running into things that you go ahead and click on and resolve the issue that's at hand. Now, of course, some of the issues might be more complex, and because of that, what you may notice is that if you need additional assistance, then of course you'll call into our support teams. So the second thing is to make sure you have the status set. So this little icon you can see is when you bring up our device log, this icon will allow you to set whether you see all the different logs that are being shown or just the status ones. So it's important to put it on status if you're going to look at your flags. And so you can see that I have a lot of flags demonstrated here in this dialog. It may not be the first flag that's the actual cause of what is showing on your UI in the device tree. So, but the important thing is that if you go investigate and take care of whatever the issues might be with the flags, then you can be assured that the system's running correct and that you'll get a nice no flags device tree. So it's go ahead, find them and fix them. Pay attention to what they're trying to tell you, because if they're ignored, then it just runs into future things that might be worse. So another thing, sometimes when you go into this device log view, you'll notice that it's telling me this condition, but that condition's not happening on my system. Well, the real error could be as much as a month ago or something like that. So I provided a little command here that you can execute, which is our healthmon command. And what you can do is do a stop and then a start of that process. And what it will do is cause the real flag to be able to show up in your log here. So it's a way of being able to flush out the real condition behind what is going on with that. And I put a little screenshot here to show you that I did a stop and then a start. And this is the proper thing that should show up on the screen. Now, of course, that requires that you have access to the CLI, the command shell, to be able to work with the system. Not all users will have that. So some of this may be appropriate that if you see flags in your UI, you can go ahead and report them to your system administrator for the ESM, and he can go ahead and follow up doing these types of processes. Another thing that we try to do when we look at the SIEM is we look through things that have to also be in the CLI, things like our disk checks. So you can see here in a good example of a problem that is happening on the system where we have one of our drives at 99% full, but the command is df-h. And so you can be able to run this on whichever system that you're running in the SIEM environment. You can do it on ESM, the receivers, the ACEs. All these will be able to show you how we're doing. Now, sometimes you'll see 80%, and 80% is okay. It's just you're looking for the situation where it's 95% or higher on any of your drives. And so that's what we want to make sure. Now, if you're running into a situation where you might have a disk fill condition, it's important to kind of get on that. Now, in the previous screen you saw, there was a hard drive full and a hard, things like that. Those are a nice way in the UI of trying to tell you the same thing you could do by checking this, but this might be the next troubleshooting step you'd want to do. So usually we'll look to make sure if a system is running slow or has another problem where it appears not to be working properly, one of the things to do is check the disk. Another one that's really relevant to a how is the system working situation is doing the top or htop command. So you can see the difference between these two screenshots here. When I bring up top, what I will do is press Shift-M and then Shift-H to sort by memory and to show threads. And what I will get is a view that looks something like these ones on the screen. And what they tell me is a couple really important things. So first is this load average that's listed at the top here. You can see on this screenshot it's 24. On this screenshot it's 71. And there's a really pronounced difference between the two screens. You can see there's all the job threads are not showing anything running there, but on this one, all of them are doing something, which indicates why we're seeing this. Now, load average is a weighted factor based off of, or weighted number based off of these three selected items here. Your user, your system, and your disk weight. And so that's how it comes up with how is the system running. Obviously, if this was running at 10, that's a lot better than 24. But these are some of the things that help you indicate that if you see very high numbers, like is over here on the right-hand side of the screen, you will need to investigate what's going on the system. And the task manager, which we'll talk about in a minute, is a good way that you can probably resolve such issues. So the other things that I've listed here are kind of how much memory is running. Usually 8 or below, 8 gig or below is what we want to see in this column. And these S, R, and D values that you see in this column have a lot to do with these three variables up here. One thing I try to do, try not to go too technical here, but I just try to make sure that the numbers actually cascade downward. So this should be higher than this, should be higher than this. So it is a pretty simplistic way of saying that will help you to understand that your load average is actually running okay for the system. So htop is another thing. I'll show a demo of that in just a second. But htop gives a graphical representation of some of the same data. So another place you can go and look is in our messages file. You use the VI tool to be able to go look at the messages. And the reason why I like VI as opposed to catting the log or tailing the log is that we get these nice color codings in the log. So red is usually what you want to make sure that's happening, not happening on the system. So if we don't have any reverse video red, then usually things are flowing along pretty well. But this would be a good indicator if you're going to call into support and say, hey, I've got this situation going on my SIM or my ESM, and I just want to make sure that everything's working okay. You can somehow give them this additional bit of information or nugget of information to help them with that. So sometimes we see exceptions. Exceptions usually are not the problem on the system. It's more when you see things like an access violation or things like that. Another thing that you can do with the messages file is it's a nice place to be able to go and watch the startup and stop processes, just to make sure that everything did come up correctly. So messages log is another good monitoring tool that we offer, and to be able to spot any problems that might be happening on the system. So the last of this is a good tool that's already in the UI. It's called our Task Manager. So the Task Manager, think of Windows, there's a Task Manager there too. There's a way to see how things are running on the system. But generally what you'll do is you'll see queries just flowing through and running in the Task Manager. Much like the bottom screen here, you can see we have different queries being executed in the product, and there's a way to see how long they've run for and their completion status. So the reason Task Manager is really valuable is that it helps us see when there are things that aren't running okay. And so I've listed a couple conditions that you'll see inside of the Task Manager. One is long-running queries. So the reasons for these types of long-running queries, so if you look to the screen to the right here, you can see I've got a query that's run for 2 hours and is only 99% complete. And so things that cause these long-running queries are usually query logic. So for instance, if you've run 90-day queries, you're going to get a longer running query in the Task Manager, and that's going to be acceptable. But depending on how long that's running, I would say the way you monitor your SIM here is if I've got a component or query that's running in here and I know a view has just been waiting on my screen, well, it might be good to evaluate what you're trying to find with that screen, those queries on the dashboard of our SIM. So, if you run a 90-day query and it's running a very complex set of logic, that may take a while to return. And so maybe there's a way to actually narrow down or filter that to get a better type of query. String-based searches, because strings are a longer way of trying to find something. In other words, if you could imagine a path, an application path, it could be SQL and backslash blah, 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 blah. Looking for that entire string is going to be a longer search than trying to look for specific patterns inside of that string, inside of a query that you might run. Conversely, if you're using a thing called regex or the contains feature, it is important that you have something longer in those strings to make it more specific. So in other words, if I was looking for my name Tom and I put that in there as a string search, well, that's the 3-character type of search is going to actually run slower than if I were to put Thomas or Tom with some, tomato or something like that, a longer string that it can actually match more specifically. Non-index fields, things like the URL fields and application fields and process fields and things like that. Those usually have, just as I mentioned, the file path field. Those usually have very long types of things, and so could produce a longer running query. So these are some of the conditions to think of: when am I running and why would I get a condition where it's run for 2 hours? And how can I tighten it up? Another situation that could come into play here on Task Manager is baseline queries. So a number of our shipped out of the box views do use baseline queries. Those queries are are running a extensive search. So in other words, instead of just saying, I want to find the set of rules, signature IDs or names or whatever, I'm also going to trend line how many more of those things occur than normal. So it's a way of getting how many more over the looking in the past did this occur. So the definition of a baseline is queries that run for 5 previous time zones. So for instance, if today is Thursday, what a baseline query would do is, if you had it turned on your view component query, it would say, okay, I'm going to look for data for the previous 5 time zones. So Thursday would mean the previous Thursday, the previous Thursday, the previous Thursday. So 5 weeks of Thursdays to gather the data for that. Now, many times that's not needed in what the search you're trying to do. You're not trying to find, how much did it occur? You're more trying to find what you're looking for. And so turning off baselines, editing that view, turning the baseline off on that component, and then resaving the view is a nice way of trying to, remove a long-running query, okay? And again, a good example of that is you can see on this system, we have probably 10 or 15 baseline queries that are still running, waiting for the view to complete because they're still trying to gather data across the 5 time zones. Okay, so baselines off is a best practice inside of our views. Another one could be stuck queries. So you may see queries that hang at 0, 25, 50, or usually like 0 and 99 are the 2 extremes that you see, like the screen at the bottom. Now 0 is, the way we can use the task manager is you can actually click on this query and you can see the data to see if it's still running. I'll demo that in a second here. But the point being is that if you do see in task manager a query that is never completing, this little red X at the end of that query is a way to actually cancel that query so that it can release it to use the resources for other things. So, okay, so let's go ahead and talk about this in the UI. So what you see here is a system that has health flags actually happening. And if I click on the topmost flag, I will get that dialog I demonstrated a minute earlier. And then this one, you can see my hard drive's running low. I have some informational flags that are happening on my system, but I do have one critical device and some data sources out of sync. Now, usually what the best way to do monitoring here is to go ahead and just do a clear all, so that way you can get down and see the devices that are actually really having the problem. And the nice thing is here, I can hover over the flag and actually see what is the condition that's happening. So if I click on this flag, which is the way you can handle the monitoring and resolution to the flags, I will be presented a dialog that has a number of the buttons for the problems that it's having. So for instance, I can go into the log for that and see the list of the flags. Okay, and you can see it is a disk space issue that is happening here. Or we can go ahead and click in on the other things that might be, maybe there's something that has to do with the device's state here. So anyways, the alarms is probably the reason it's out of configuration. So for instance, I can click that button and it will go execute things to write out our alarms, our field match alarms to the device. But this is a place where we can actually see, it will present the buttons after clicking the flag of what the thing you need to resolve is. And so I'll click on this real quickly. I'm not going to worry about going too much deeper here. But anyhow, by clicking those buttons and resolving the condition, you can actually clear this device tree so that it doesn't have anything left in it. Okay, let's go to Task Manager. The Task Manager is found by going into System Properties. And so I can click the little gear here when I'm on the physical display, and I can get into System Properties and go to ESM Management, Maintenance, and then the Task Manager is here. Usually what I'll do is go ahead and uncheck this Hide System Tasks so I can make sure I'm seeing all the queries that are being presented in this UI. And I can scroll through and look for things that are still running, 0%, long running. Most of the time I'm looking for, since this is sorted, the things that might be running for very long time periods, and just see if I can narrow that down to who might be running that, the user that's running it, and the type of query, and the name of the query that's being run would correspond to the view that's actually executing that. So, and again, I have the ability to go ahead and stop that query by clicking the X, to, if there is a query that's taking up a lot of resources on the system. And usually this will help to recover the slowness conditions you might see in the UI. So here you can see top presented in front of you, and what we can see is that the system is running a load average of 8, running perfectly fine. Shift M, Shift H. And what we'll do is we'll see a list of that, and sometimes you can press the letter I if you want to get more specific on what is currently running. And so you can see I don't really see any long list of job. Okay. H top gives you a graphical representation of what's going on. The columns are clickable, so I can sort by memory again and be able to look for specific, what's running and taking time in the system. Usually they're running CPU, the writes and other processes here, and CPU. And last, of course, is I can run those commands to reset my health monitor. So if it's the ESM that is having the problem, you'd want to do that. If it's the receiver that's having the problem, you want to do that, or the ACE. But I can go ahead, ESS health mon on the ESM, and only health mon on the devices. Okay, let's talk about tuning. So alarms is one of the key features that is running a lot of queries in the system. So I want you to picture an organization or company that has 5 users running, queries on the system. I bring up a dashboard, bring in another dashboard. That's what they're doing all the time. Well, alarms can be considered another set of users that are running in the environment. And so alarms are a really great feature. This is a way of saying, look for something and help me know when that happened. And so we definitely want to use the alarms feature, but what I see happening sometimes is there are either too many or too many running too often. Okay, is the common problem in our SIM, and the idea of using the alarms feature to hunt for things is to make sure that you understand what it's hunting for, not just to create a lot of alarms, just to, oh, I need to know this, need to know that, those are some of the situations that cause the system to be running so many queries that you don't give any time for your people running your dashboards to do to get quality time. So too many is one condition. Misconfiguration, in other words, the time that they're being run by. So if you look over on the right hand side of the screen, I've got several screenshots here where we have like running at 0 or 1. Generally, if you think about it, that means that the alarm is going to run 1,440 times per day. And so the question is 1,440 times of the alarm doing it versus, the use of the system. You have to make good concessions on what is the thing you're looking for. I usually try to counsel on this one that if you can break up your alarms into priority 1, priority 2, and priority 3 types of alarms, you'll know that your priority 1s probably do, deserve to have between 0 and 5 minutes set for their timer. But on the priority 2s and priority 3s, probably more in the 15 to 20 minute range, or 30 minutes in an hour, depending on what they're trying to look for. Okay, so the query logic order. I presented a screenshot here where you can see I've done a field match alarm and I have several conditions here. Order is important when you're actually setting up this logic. So if you think about it from the how many will the first one match, and then how many will the second one match from the first one's list, and how many will the third one match from the previous 2 lists, then you can go ahead and order these sets of logic inside of field match alarms to make them efficient. So SIG-ID is almost always the best one to put first, because it's looking for a very finite list and therefore should return a less number of events occurring within a 1 minute, 10 minute, 30-minute time frame. And then you can go ahead and look for other fields. And you can see, like, the host field would be kind of a string-based type of search. And again, you're asking yourself, how many would you trigger there? So query logic order. Alarms not acknowledged. I put a screen down here, and I just want you to consider that a lot of times we create alarms. So go back to the too many condition. If there are triggering a lot of alarms, realize that if they're not acknowledged there's a flag within the alarm that says you can acknowledge an alarm, auto acknowledge it. You get a lot of entries into your alarms pane here. And so again, filling up a database table with a lot of things. So it's good to either, understand what you're going to do, whether this is an alarm you actually need to go investigate, or is it something that can be just noted that it happened and therefore stored. So again, we have to think about this from the amount of queries being run and tables and other types of things. So as you go create alarms, and the reason I wanted to present this is to make sure that you can, be designing your alarms efficiently so that your system runs efficiently. Another thing to think about, so let's say I have 100 alarms created this year, and next year I create another 100 alarms. Are the old 100 alarms still relevant? It's something to think about as you design. Should you clean up something? We have a backup feature that backs up our configuration, and so the idea there is that you could have backed up these 100 alarms from last year, and maybe it's time to clean up those ones so that they aren't either running or don't fill up the dialog, so it's more manageable to do in the alarms dialog. Reports, kind of the same list if you look at the things, too many of them. Time to run, devices selected, query performance, what's the filters you're using, are you using long time ranges? All of these kind of contribute to doing the same things of filling up a lot of things, storing files out, the reports that are generated from your report, like your PDFs and your CSVs, are they stored on your ESM? But a lot of time using process here to accomplish what you're trying to do. So I presented a couple of things here, and I wanted to talk about why. This screenshot on the right here shows a report that has been created, and you can see I'm kind of like 60-75% down the way of the report. But if you could just imagine this report, it's pages and pages and pages and pages of components. I've seen one time a report being 20 pages of this type of thing, and if you could imagine 135 queries, 400 other types of things, sections of what the query is trying to do. So the this causes a long running report. And the example that I've given down here is, if you can look at this one report, it was started on the 7th at this time, but you could see that the currently running reports are at 1 o'clock the next day. So I already know this has been going for 15, 20 hours and will go for 72 hours if allowed. Better to break up those reports. The best practice is really about 2 or 4 pages. And then, if you have to have a report that generates this much data, I would break it up into 10 reports. Next concept here is running them. So you end up getting in your task manager, you can see that I'm getting things that are running here for very long sets of times. But better to not only just break these reports up, but also schedule them to run in non-business hours. So between midnight and 6 a.m. or between 6 p.m. and 12 p.m. Now, another common problem that I see with reports is they all get run at midnight. So stagger them. Run the fastest ones at midnight, run the next fastest ones, and you'll know because of when the report generates after its start time. The next fastest ones at 1, the next fastest ones at 2, the next fastest one, the slowest ones at 3, 4, or 5. and just try to keep them out of the business hours. So those are some of the concepts with that. Cyber threat feeds. Cyber threat feeds is a great feature to be able to go ahead and find indicators of compromise, and we put the feature in there to help you to do that. The problem can come to be is that when you set the configuration of how often to go check for new watch lists from your new data from your IOC, or to be able to like it shows daily at specified time here, you can actually create it. It's best to do it no more often than 8 hours. That's kind of the sweet spot, and better to do it once a day if you can. So you can see here that they start them off, and this is a once a day example where things are running at a certain time. But again, you kind of look at that midnight hour. I would probably run most of my cyber threat feeds before midnight, between 6 p.m. and 12 p.m. Another thing that happens with the watch list generated by an IOC is you can see there's many kind of dimensions, indicators inside of the watch list that you can set up inside the IOC feed that you can set up to build a watch list. Well, the problem with doing many inside of one of your cyber threat feeds is that you have to look at this as an OR query. I'm going to look for this or this or this or this or this or this. And so when you go specify, I want to do 30 days of looking for this or this or this or this or this, it's a long running query. So is it better to do 7 days? Can you do it looking for the previous day's data with this? Some of those configurations will help this feature run more efficiently. Okay, let's go talk about these features. I'm only going to focus on two types of alarm: internal event match and field match. There are a number of different types of alarms that we can create to look for various conditions, and that's all in here. But the important concepts to understand about your either internal event match or field match alarms is, what are they looking for? The most common use of the internal event match alarm is to look for SIG IDs. And so understanding what you're looking for, which is a 306 event, is a internal event for our ESM health flags. A 47 event would be a correlation event. Okay, a 43 would be a Windows event. So a 65 would be a Linux event. So depending on what you're looking for, you get into a situation where what is checked. And you can see it here. If I was looking for a correlated event, the query I'm trying to ask for to be generated is an insanely large query. I'm looking for all the devices in my system to find a correlated event. Well, really, the correct configuration for this would be either to select this, or more specifically, only the rule correlation, the rule correlation that we have in the system, as opposed to the risk correlation, which doesn't have anything to do with that. So the proper configuration for this event is to specify. So if it was a Linux event, then obviously I would be looking onto my receiver and looking for things that say Linux. So specifying the right devices to run the query is the best filter you could ever do on an alarm. And this will take an alarm from taking maybe a minute and a half to run to running in 15 seconds. So it's important to go ahead and specify what you're looking for, and then the device that you're looking at. And I talked about auto acknowledge. That's this checkbox right here. So if this is an alarm that you just need to note that it happened and it's not an investigative type of situation, which you might send a message or create a case or do some other actions from here, then go ahead and do that, and that will help seeing endless lists of things in your alarm pane down here. Field match alarms. Again, you can see this is a correlated event because it's a 47 dash, and sure enough, this has been scoped correctly, and any other actions that have to happen from this. Reports. I talked about when they run. the most common condition is they run daily at 12 a.m. So again, I could run I could have 50 reports here all running daily at 12 a.m. Or I can go ahead and do what I can to create other conditions that can, run this at 8 p.m. or 2 a.m. or things like that. So staggering and finding out what they're trying to do. So long time ranges, this is a good example. You can see this is looking at a previous month. Again, we wouldn't want to turn a baseline on that because it would look for 5 months. But how many of these are being run? And again, when do they get run? Some of the customers I've worked with, I get them, coach them to run them on the weekends. Is there a way we could run them on the last day of the month, or we could run it on 2 days later on the weekend for the previous month of data? If that fits your business need, then that's okay to do. And lastly, cyber threat feeds. So you can specify in here, again, when do they run? And you have the same types of conditions you can specify. And then what are the indicator types that come out of it? And then the back trace, 24 hours. Is that sufficient for what you need to do, or does it have to be longer? I'm gonna make more and more comment on reports. So when I'm adding a report, you have a report builder. I can come down here and actually use our report builder to create a set of components that I want to run a query for. And this is what I was talking about, building a 10-page report to do many, many things as opposed to building, a 4-page report. So it's really free form in here, and you can modify this to do, whatever the types of queries and filters and other things you want to do. Having filters on this is a really good best practice, as opposed to looking for all the data from that dimension. Okay, so I think I've demonstrated a few things here. So I guess I'll go ahead and back over to you, Austin.
Thank you, Tom. Great information. McAfee has done a lot in the self-service space already. We're expanding our customer service self-capabilities, including but not limited to our McAfee Enterprise Support app for Android and iOS, new product support pages, the support community, McAfee Support YouTube channel, social media help needs on Facebook and Twitter. The EPO Support Center plugin is available for you to download within your EPO application, free of cost. You can learn more about the EPO Support Center on McAfee Support YouTube channel and on support.mcafee.com. This concludes the webinar.